This has been
a very tense afternoon in Ferguson.
There were hundreds of bystanders out here who were absolutely fuming over the boy's death.
Where rioting and looting has broken out tonight.
It's just a completely different dynamic out here with so many people upset.
You know, I could see the fire in the darkness, and I could hear the voices and not see the faces. And you could just hear this voice of pain. You could just hear this pain and anger that I had never heard in my entire life. Now, August 10th, when I stepped on West Florissant and I looked down the hill and I could see the Quick Trip on fire, I knew at that moment that I had never seen anything, and I got this sick feeling in my stomach. And I looked at it and I said, God, how are we going to make it through this?
It's a part of town this veteran patrol captain knows well. Ron Johnson grew up not far from Ferguson's West Florissant Avenue, a 4-lane stretch of road through a sluggish business district, no more than about 4 football fields long, that all of the country stopped to watch in 2014, where this St. Louis suburb became the hashtag for an uprising. 5 days into what people just remember as Ferguson, Missouri's governor tapped Highway Patrol Captain Ron Johnson to try and bring calm to the crisis. Tear gas hadn't worked. The show of force hadn't either. Johnson tried a different approach.
One thing that I realized that those first few days of the incident, we had not really talked to each other on both sides. I wanted to see the faces of the people that were along West Florissant, but I wanted them to know that I respected them. And when you hear someone's voice, you're willing to look at them in the face, right there, that says that you want to hear and you give value to them.
Without his riot gear, he walked with protesters. For that, some have called Ron Johnson a hero to his community, others a traitor to his badge. But Johnson says his focus was on what he was hearing from the people in the streets.
Were things that I'd heard in the community before, things that I'd heard from friends, and in some cases, things that I believe that I experienced when I was a young man. And so I knew those things were true, but I also knew there were people that were trying to make a difference. We just hadn't gotten there.
5 years later, have we gotten any closer? When it comes to police officers and the people they're sworn to serve and protect, what are the Ferguson effects? With crowds following him, Captain Johnson gave the order for police to pull back. But it would take days for the truce to last. And in the years since, there have been more protests, often around the same central issue, the relationship between law enforcement and the black community in St. Louis. Usually, this debate plays out between protesters and police. But even behind the blue line, there are different perspectives on how policing has changed and needs to change since August of 2014.
Coming from being an African American, growing up in North St. Louis, I know that feeling of distrust for the police. I still get nervous if the police are behind me sometimes.
Heather Taylor is a sergeant with the St. Louis Police Department and the president of the Ethical Society of Police, an organization made up of mostly African American officers with the stated mission of exposing and ending what its members see as corruption in policing.
I can tell you from firsthand experiences as a police officer, as a very young police officer, being profiled and driving to Richmond Heights and Clayton in those areas and being stopped. And like, you know, hey, I'm not out here to commit a crime. And those things are truly experiences that a lot of African Americans have experienced in our community.
What does the word Ferguson mean to you?
You know, it just, it signifies loss to me, and a missed opportunity for law enforcement to step up, admit some of the mistakes that we've made, and ultimately put things in place to help correct it. I mean, you're not going to ever replace someone's child that was killed. You're not going to ever replace him. It's nothing that anybody really can do but change for them. I don't know if much has changed since then.
A new report seems to back that up. Forward Through Ferguson grew out of a state commission formed to take on issues raised in 2014. Through dozens of interviews with citizens and officers, it found that, quote, though policing was the lightning rod that sparked the commission's work on racial equity, it has also been one of the sectors more resistant to reform. But some say change certainly has come to policing in the St. Louis region, and it's not good.
Every officer out there thinks that it's possible that they can go to prison for the rest of their life for lawfully defending themselves.
Jeff Roorda is with the union that represents police officers in the city of St. Louis and, since late 2018, prosecutors in St. Louis County.
What has changed in police work since August of 2014?
The expectations, I guess. I mean, we are expected to fix every problem in the community that we police, and now that's we've become the scapegoat for every problem that's in our community. I mean, all we can do is respond and try to see that justice is done and try to see that the violence stops in that particular situation. But we're not the ones that created the social setting that all this happens in.
What's the Ferguson effect? Is that a real thing? What does it mean to you?
Yeah, it's very real. To me, it's synonymous with depolicing.
Depolicing.
Depolicing, yeah, less policing. And it's not, I'm not talking about some blue flu where some union boss like me says, we're not gonna write any more tickets, we're not gonna make any arrests. I'm talking about just human nature, that police officers, when they're under fire as they have been for the 5 years after Ferguson, that the natural human reaction is to just shut down. And when you don't know what you can do in your job that's not going to be criticized, you just stop doing your job. I mean, it's very much a foxhole mentality, and that's not what anybody signed up for.
Roorda offers the foxhole analogy intentionally. He wrote a book after Ferguson, subtitled The War on Police.
This is something I want people to understand and to think about a little bit. We've got nearly 1 million police officers across the United States, and every day, each of those officers is having dozens of interactions with suspects and victims and witnesses. And every couple weeks, MSNBC or CNN can find a encounter that they don't like, that they want to criticize. I mean, don't think about how often we get things wrong. Think about how often we get things right.
I've been shot at in the line of duty. And even after being shot at, I never thought, oh, there's this war on us as cops. They're coming to get us. No, there are people, individuals, who make bad decisions, who are violent and should never have access to guns in our community, that happen to target an officer in that moment. Just like there are officers within our department that shouldn't have a badge or a gun either. I think a lot of problems that we have, we could eliminate some of them, a good number of them, at the hiring process. You can't hire someone that has shaky character in the beginning and ignore that, or ignore those different red flags while they were in the police academy. Was this officer just uber aggressive? And did they have problems with talking to people in role play scenarios? I think the one thing that we must continue to do is give de-escalation classes and show officers, when they're escalating situations and how to go from here to here. That's a skill set that I do believe that we can learn.
One way police work nationwide is different since 2014 is the scrutiny on entire departments. Accusations of racism in the St. Louis Police Department surfaced in the summer of 2019. A report called the Plainview Project uncovered what it said were racist social media posts by former and current St. Louis officers.
So there's the trust issue between the community and the police, but even within the department, there's that stress.
Absolutely. And you think about the Plainview Project, and you know that you're walking amongst officers who have issues with you because of your race. You know that. You cannot act this way. You cannot post those things. You cannot be accepting of behavior. There is a culture in our department, and some of them are at the very top. Some of them are they're your commanders, and they're the people who are making the ultimate decisions. And there's that biases.
We advocate for a police department where folks are held to very high standards, and that when somebody's given our profession a bad name, we show them the door. But it's not my job to stand up on a stump and shout that at the top of my voice.
There seems to be a pretty big gulf between your perspective and the perspective of even fellow police officers who are in the Ethical Society, for instance. Is there any common ground there between those two organizations, or is there any way to meet in the middle?
Well, I mean, I think what we missed in Ferguson, I think the critical thing we missed in Ferguson is that you don't have to agree about what happened there. You don't have to, we don't all have to agree that Darren Wilson did everything right or Michael Brown didn't do anything wrong. We can put all that aside and just agree that we don't want it to happen again. And that's not the conversation we've really had. You know, it's all been about, on both sides, I'm just as guilty about it as anybody else, but it's all been about assigning blame, and none of it's been about, hey, how do we make sure this doesn't happen again?
No side is perfect and no side is always right when you talk about police and community relations and the problems that exist. Sometimes both sides are wrong, and sometimes this side gets it right, that side gets it right. And it's important that people continue to listen to each other and want to listen.
But if it hasn't happened in the 5 years since Ferguson, why could it happen now? Perhaps there's a lesson from Captain Johnson and his walks down West Florissant. At a time when so many picked a side, he was willing to walk in the middle and listen, and stayed committed even when the peace he brokered failed.
Some people say, you know what, you were a traitor. And I hear that on both sides. But I was willing to take that to bring a calm, and I took that vest off because that vest is a layer of protection, and it's something that law enforcement needs. But in that moment, I wanted to know that I did need protection from them because I didn't fear them. And not from an arrogant standpoint, but I wanted them to know that I was them, and I understood because our humanity was the same, and we were alike in more ways than we were different.